In 1937, soldiers working for the fascist government of Italy tore a nearly 2,000-year-old monument out of the ground in northern Ethiopia, cut it into pieces, and shipped it to Rome. They put it up in a public square, a trophy of conquest, standing in the Italian capital for the next 68 years, visible to millions of tourists and residents who walked past it for generations, most with no idea what it actually was or where it had come from. The monument was called the Obelisk of Aksum. It wasn't just old. It was one of the tallest single pieces of carved stone ever raised by human hands anywhere on Earth. Built by an empire so wealthy that ancient Rome itself once described it as one of the four great powers of the world, in the same breath as Rome, Persia, and China. That empire is barely taught anywhere outside Ethiopia today. This is its story: the wealth, the faith, the stone, and the theft that Ethiopia spent nearly 70 years fighting to reverse. The Kingdom of Aksum rose in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea, and by the time it reached its height, somewhere around the 3rd and 4th centuries, it controlled territory stretching across the Red Sea into parts of the Arabian Peninsula. Its main port, Adulis, sat directly on one of the busiest shipping lanes on the planet, the route that connected the Mediterranean world to the Indian Ocean, centuries before anyone in Europe had a name for either. We sat at one of the most valuable crossroads on the planet, the trade route connecting the Roman Mediterranean, Persia, and India. Ivory, gold, spices, incense, enslaved people moving in and out of Red Sea ports, textiles, glassware, tortoiseshell, rhinoceros horn. Aksum taxed and controlled a huge share of what moved through that corridor for centuries. A Greek merchant's guide from around the 1st century, written specifically to help traders navigate these waters, names Aksum directly as a major market power, describing its king and the goods available at Adulis in enough detail that historians still use it as a primary source today. We were wealthy enough to do something almost no other state in the ancient world had done. We minted our own gold coinage, stamped with the faces of our own kings. At the time, only a small handful of governments on the entire planet, Rome, Persia, and a few others, were minting gold coins at all. Aksum's coins have been found as far away as India, physical proof of trade networks that stretched across 2 oceans, and some of the earliest Aksumite coins carry inscriptions in Greek specifically so foreign merchants could read them. A deliberate choice to make our currency legible to the entire trading world, not just to us. A 3rd century Persian writer, describing what he considered the great powers of the known world, named 4: Persia, Rome, China, and Aksum. Not Egypt, not any other African kingdom. Aksum, by name, ranked among the 4 greatest states on Earth by a contemporary who had no reason to flatter us. Wealth built monuments, and Aksum's monuments still astonish engineers today. Scattered across the city of Aksum is a field of stele, massive single blocks of granite, carved to resemble multi-story buildings, complete with false doors and false windows carved directly into the stone, false door locks, and beam ends carved to mimic wooden construction, even though the entire thing is one solid piece of rock from top to bottom. These weren't rough monoliths. They were carved to look like tall houses for the dead, precise enough that the carved detail work is still crisp today, more than 1,000 years later. The largest one ever successfully raised stands over 20 meters tall, cut from a single piece of rock, and remains standing in Aksum today. An even larger stele was attempted. By most estimates, It would have stood over 30 meters tall and weighed more than 500 tons, making it among the largest single stones ever quarried and moved by any civilization in human history, heavier than anything the ancient Egyptians ever successfully raised in one piece. That one collapsed, likely during construction or shortly after, and its massive broken pieces still lie in Aksum exactly where they fell more than 1,500 years ago, split into huge sections that visitors can walk alongside today. Nobody has fully reconstructed how a civilization without modern cranes quarried, transported, carved, and raised stones of this scale from a quarry located a considerable distance outside the city. That's not us being coy about the answer. It's a genuine, unresolved question in archaeology, the same category of open engineering mystery that surrounds monuments on multiple continents. What isn't a mystery is that it happened, and that the evidence is still standing in the ground today. Sometime in the 4th century, under King Ezana, Aksum adopted Christianity as the religion of the state. This makes Aksum one of the very first kingdoms anywhere in the world, not just in Africa, to formally adopt Christianity at the level of government, only a handful of years behind Armenia, widely credited as the first. This happened decades before the Roman Empire itself would do the same under Constantine's successors. Ezana had the new faith's symbol struck directly onto Aksumite coinage, replacing the older sun and crescent imagery almost immediately, a permanent, dated record, still held in museum collections today, of exactly when that shift happened. Ethiopian Orthodox Christianity that grew out of this moment is still practiced today, one of the oldest, continuously practiced Christian traditions on earth, with its own calendar, its own church architecture, and its own scripture tradition, including books considered canon in Ethiopia that don't appear in most other Christian Bibles anywhere else in the world. And this is where we have to slow down and be honest with you, because it's one of the most significant claims connected to Aksum, and also one of the most contested. According to Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, the Ark of the Covenant, the biblical vessel said to contain the tablets of the 10 Commandments, was brought to Aksum thousands of years ago and rests today inside the Chapel of the Tablet, next to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. Tradition holds that a single guardian monk is chosen to watch over it for the rest of his life, and that no one else is permitted to see it. We're not going to tell you that's definitely true, and we're not going to tell you it's definitely false. It is a matter of deep religious tradition and national identity for millions of Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, held with total sincerity for centuries. It is also, by any historical standard, unverifiable. No outside researcher has ever been permitted to examine what's inside that chapel, and there is no independent historical or archaeological confirmation of the object's presence or authenticity. Both of those things are true at once, and we think you deserve to hear both rather than a version flattened into either definitely real or just a myth. In 1935, fascist Italy under Benito Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in a war of conquest, in direct violation of the League of Nations charter that Italy itself had signed, using chemical weapons against Ethiopian civilians and soldiers despite international treaties banning their use. Ethiopia fought back for 2 years before falling under Italian occupation in 1937. One of the last African nations to lose its independence, and one that had defeated an earlier Italian invasion decades before at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a victory that made Ethiopia a global symbol of African resistance to colonization long before this second invasion succeeded. In 1937, Italian forces took one of the standing obelisks from the stele field at Aksum, a monument roughly 1,700 years old, cut it into 3 pieces, and shipped it to Rome as a war trophy. Mussolini had it re-erected in Piazza di Porta Capena, near the Circus Maximus, as a public monument to Italian imperial conquest, a deliberate visual statement that Rome had once again conquered Africa the way ancient Rome once claimed to. It stood there for the next 68 years. This wasn't an isolated act by rogue soldiers. It was a deliberate, state-directed act of cultural theft, ordered as propaganda for a fascist regime that wanted physical trophies of the empire it claimed to be building. Ethiopia never stopped asking for it back. Italy formally agreed to return the obelisk as part of a United Nations peace treaty in 1947. It took until 2005, 58 years after that promise, 68 years after the theft itself, for the obelisk to actually be dismantled, flown back to Ethiopia in 3 separate cargo flights on one of the largest aircraft in the world at the time, and in 2008 finally re-erected in its original location in Aksum, where it stands today, restored to the exact spot it was carved for in the 4th century. The Kingdom of Aksum eventually declined, worn down by shifting trade routes, environmental pressures including possible long-term drought, and the rise of new regional powers that redirected trade away from Red Sea ports, and by around the 8th or 9th century, its political power as a dominant empire had faded. But it didn't disappear. Its religious tradition never stopped. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church that Aksum established remains one of the largest and oldest Christian communities in the world, with tens of millions of members today. Its language, Ge'ez, remains in liturgical use in Ethiopian churches to this day. Its stele are still standing, including the one that came home. We opened with a monument being torn out of the ground and shipped away as a trophy. We're closing with that same monument standing back exactly where it was carved to stand 17 centuries ago. That didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen quickly. It took a formal treaty signed in 1947, decades of diplomatic pressure that outlasted multiple Italian governments, and an Ethiopian state that refused to let the theft become permanent just because enough time had passed. 68 years is a long time to keep asking for something back. Ethiopia kept asking anyway. Aksum controlled trade routes between 3 continents. Aksum minted gold when almost no one else on earth did. A 3rd century writer ranked us alongside Rome and Persia as one of the greatest powers alive, and we adopted Christianity as a state before most of Europe had ever heard the word. And when part of what we built was stolen by a fascist government looking for a trophy, we got it back, not through force, but through decades of simply refusing to stop asking. If this is the first time you're hearing about the Kingdom of Aksum, welcome. There's a lot more where this came from.